Good luck on your Jolly 3 review, SirFiftyFive.
Hopefully this time it doesn't take more than a year!
Will SirFiftyFive make a Jolly 3 review? Yes.
Hello, SirFiftyFive. If you don't make Jolly 3 review right now, I'm going to find you, and I won't be nice. I'm going to kill you. I will hurt you.
Welp. Hey kids, Sir50 Fangame review here, talking Jolly 3. If you've snooped around my channel, or have just been here forever, you may know my first 2 video essays were full reviews of Jolly 1 and 2. Since then I've adapted my style quite a bit, and my videos have become less review and more showcase, if that makes any sense. However, that changes today, as I'm reprising my role as the worst fangame reviewer to talk about Jolly 3, the best worst fangame. Okay, so what do I mean by best worst? Jolly 3, created by Ivan G, is the 3rd installment in the Jolly series, releasing a little over 9 months after Jolly 2, which, if you remember, released way earlier than it should have, which is most likely why I, and many others, don't like it as much. Ivan listened to this criticism, thankfully, and gave us Jolly 3, a complete return to form in what feels like a proper sequel to Jolly 1. I mean, it even looks like the original, even down to the color palette. You still got it. However, even after Jolly 3 was released with a mostly positive reception, more hardcore fans of the series still had the same old issues. Years following its launch, and fans are still divided on its quality. Some regarding the game as a highly innovative sequel, and others not.
I was always told, play this game. I was always told to play this game. It was one of the only popular FNAF fan games I hadn't played, and everyone told me it was great. And they fucking lied to me. This game sucks.
Personally, I regard it as the best worst fangame. Simply put, it's good at being not good. Jolly 3 was released at a time when there really wasn't a quality standard for most fangames. If you knew how to make a rough model and could use ClickTeam, you too could make the next hit fangame. Don't get me wrong, we've received some of the most influential games because of this period, but at the same time, I can't think of a fangame that was made before 2017 that's held up. Jolly 3 was one of the first fangames to bridge the gap between what a true passion project was and something that could be taken as an official product. In that respect, I think it's why it stood out so much. To many, it felt like the sister location we never got, which is a huge compliment, by the way. Jolly 3 attempts a lot of never-before-seen gameplay variations. It has mini-games reminiscent of sister location, a full office section, which the game lacked, a few fully animated cutscenes, a better general story, and George. He's George. Alright, I've stalled long enough. Here's my honest review of Jolly 3. Before I start ripping into Jolly 3, there are some things I need to mention. Jolly 3 is split into 2 games. Chapter 1, which I'm about to go over, and Chapter 2, which was released about a year after Chapter 1 and follows the events directly after. For the sake of this video, I will be covering both chapters, as it's important for the story to be covered at once. Secondly, the story of Jolly 3 is incredibly confusing. The team behind this game and its in-progress sequel, Jolly 4, have created a full lore document with everything currently known about the series and its story. There are a lot of details in this document that aren't mentioned at all in any of the games, so if you've played the game and don't recall certain story beats, it's in this document. There, that should clear up any confusion. Jolly 3 takes place in 2017. Shortly after conspiracies of Jolly Entertainment have surfaced, 2 friends and investigators, Jack Carson and Theo Murphy, investigate an abandoned Jolly factory. One's co-owned by Fazbear Entertainment. In Jolly 3, we play as Jack Carson, a silent protagonist. Throughout the game, we are accompanied by Theo as he more so commentates and helps guide Jack around. This is all you really need to know going into the game, as the cutscene at the start doesn't explain anything. Speaking of the opening cutscene, it's another element that made Jolly 3 stand out. Not a lot of people implemented fully animated cutscenes into their free fan game. Even today, this cutscene looks great and serves as a decent amount of energy going into the game. Anyway, after it ends, we're loaded into the main night. And hey, this office looks very similar to the control module from Sister Location. Anyway, this is the main office, and it's our job to survive until 6 AM. And that quickly, I already have an issue with this. The main structure of the night seems to have us sitting here for 6 hours with no real goal in mind. We don't have to sit here. We just do it because the animatronics are supposedly active. This section of the game could have easily been replaced with something like Sister Location, with multiple objectives per night, like rooms to search or something to find each time. Even if there needs to be a sit and survive section, why not use a different room each time? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have a sit and survive part be the core focus on gameplay when the story's goal is to have us explore the facility. Regardless, we're here for 6 hours each night, so we better get used to the gameplay. We're given access to a camera panel where we can do a couple of things. We can view the cameras of this level of the facility, do maintenance on our gas supply, and repair any offline fans. Each of them thankfully has equal importance. The main gameplay of this section consists of watching the cameras until the animatronics get into your office. Once one of them does, we must pull the giant lever in the office that exerts gas into the room, which makes them leave. You heard that right, we have to hotbox the office to survive. That's a sentence I never thought I'd say out loud. This gameplay is fine, but everyone is dealt with in the same way, which is unfortunate since there really isn't a way to differentiate between characters. So each of them equally don't stand out. It doesn't really matter anyway, the two you should really care about are George and Jolly, they'll come back later. The Office gameplay isn't just waiting for animatronics, it's also waiting for systems to fail. Occasionally, a fan in the building will go offline. When this happens, you must search through every camera to find the room with the disabled fan. If there is one part of the main gameplay I absolutely despise, it's this right here. So much unnecessary time is spent searching through every camera to eventually find the one you need. On top of that, there are multiple camera threats that you need to be careful of. That's right, Jolly 3 has its own phantoms. Since the building was co-owned by Fazbear Entertainment, it makes sense that the 4 phantoms are the core 4 from FNAF. The main camera threat is Metal Chica, who will randomly appear in one of the cameras, like Phantom BB. Unlike BB, you must stare at Chica until she goes away before you can change cameras. I don't think this change in mechanics would have been a terrible thing, but there's another threat on top of this that makes it so annoying. Meet Metal Foxy, the only phantom that can end your run instead of inconveniencing it. Anytime a fan goes out, a sort of timer starts, where if you wait long enough without repairing the broken fan, Metal Foxy will kill you. I'm not exactly sure how this one got past any playtesting. Wait, actually I know why. There wasn't any. If I had to guess, Ivan wanted to give the player a reason to take time to repair the fans, and as a result, we got Metal Foxy. While it works, he for sure needs a rebalance. I feel like I die to him way too frequently. Alright, we've talked about 2 of the 4 medals, so the other 2 must be Bonnie and Freddy. Surprisingly, they're just as forgettable as the main cast. Metal Bonnie has a chance to appear in one of the window lights. Notice the problem? I'll give you a minute. Yeah, that's right. The window lights serve 0 purpose, so you never need to worry about Bonnie. Ever. Ivan could have still had Bonnie in the windows, but if he reversed it, the mechanic would actually be so much better. There's already no need to check the light, so why not have Bonnie start to materialize in one of the windows? Then, after some time, we need to use the light to get rid of him. Something as simple as this would have been infinitely better than what we got. I can't say that Metal Freddy is any less forgettable either. Occasionally, when flipping the cameras down, he'll spawn in the office. As long as you flip the cameras up and back quickly, you should be fine. Okay, I think we've covered the main mechanics. While the office segment of this game is often forgettable and generally boring to play, I don't think it's that bad. This is genuine progress from Ivan. Might I remind you that Jolly 2's gameplay loop was arguably worse than this. After the main night segment ends, we can finally venture into the building. Theo usually guides us around and each night has a new objective for us, usually locating a safe with classified documents. This only happens 3 times throughout the game, and the other 2 are completely different elements of the game. But these sections follow a pretty similar path. Locate a room, locate the safe, and then before unlocking the safe, we're thrown into a small survival minigame. For example, the sections with Tweety and Maxie. I have no problems with either of these. They both build tension effectively while also requiring a decent amount of focus outside of surviving. They both work a lot like the Night 2 minigame from Sister Location involving Funtime Freddy, but each character's attacks are well choreographed through their movements. One of them involves creating paths, another typing. The typing one arguably being the weaker of the 2 since the game's core audience probably hasn't learned to type quite yet. I really wish I could say more about these 2 sections because they're genuinely a blast to play, but I have way more to say on the other nights that aren't as straightforward. After night 2, we're led to the far back of the building to locate another safe. Everything goes smoothly until it's time to leave, when the lights suddenly go out. Silence fills the room for a moment until a voice begins to speak. This is Tony, a grieving mother possessing Antoinette, a puppet-esque animatronic. Tony wants us to find the truth behind her and her daughter's death, and by doing so, allows us to live. This is continued into night 3, where as soon as we leave the office, we're jumped by Antoinette. What seems like minutes pass until we reawaken on conveyor. Tony and the spirits of the murdered children possessing the Fazbear Entertainment characters are less than impressed by Jack's attempts at retribution, and strap him to a conveyor with the intent of killing him. For the next 2.5 minutes, We struggle to escape our restraints until the machine eventually shuts off, courtesy of Theo, finally doing something useful. While I'm not the biggest fan of this part of the game, it is really cool to finally see some story implemented into the actual game. Although not the most believable nor interesting idea ever, it's still refreshing to get something else to think about than the typical find evidence, get out idea that we're so used to. After all that, would you believe me if I told you there's still more to each night after the main shift and the post-game task? Enter the 8-bit sections, by far the most forgettable part of this game. In all fairness, this game was made at the time when these sections were still cool to make. This section of the game tells a different story, however. Circa 1980, and William Afton is giving the grand tour of Freddy Fazbear's to a newly hired employee, Eric Smith. Remember that name, he's very important. William shows the building off, eventually ending the tour by telling Eric that he's not allowed in a certain back room. And I'm sure you know where this is going. William gives Eric a stern talking, saying that no one talks about the back room, no matter what. Cut to a few days later, and it's bring your daughter to work day. Eric brings his daughter Zoe, who he asks to wait in the car until he clears her to come in. Bored and tired of waiting, Zoe ignores her father's request and enters the building anyway, where she's immediately jumped by William Afton and killed. Eric witnesses the murder and tries to convince William to think about what he's doing with some of the worst persuasion skills I have ever heard. Some time passes after Zoe's death, and Eric is trying to sneak onto a heavily guarded cargo ship. He avoids all detection and hides in the back of a truck. For what purpose? I don't know. This is where Eric's story for this part of the game ends. Everything I've mentioned thus far has been focused on nights 1 through 4 of Chapter 1, and while nothing huge changes on night 5, it's worth focusing on separately. Theo is understandably upset that he and Jack have come up with nothing of interest, so Theo comes up with the idea to bring an animatronic out of the building. While arguably one of the dumbest ideas ever, Jack silently complies, and so it is. After the night ends, Theo gets a signal reading from an animatronic, which leads Jack to an elevator to a secret level of the facility. End chapter. Just like that, we're through only part of Jolly 3. While not terrible so far, there is definitely room for improvement on Ivan's end. For sure a step in the right direction, however. From a world-building perspective, Ivan absolutely nailed this game. He further expanded upon the lore of Jolly Entertainment, while not a strong or compelling idea, has now completely split itself apart from the very generic evil corporation shtick that many games seem to reuse. To be honest, in every way that isn't the actual game, this installment is incredible, and it's no wonder the series gained so much traction. That and the 6 million views on the Markiplier video definitely helped. Jolly 3 Chapter 2, if I'm being honest, is not any better than Chapter 1. In fact, I think it's worse in almost every aspect. I don't think that it's necessarily Ivan's fault though. Chapter 2 was meant to be a DLC to the pre-existing Jolly 3. It was meant to be something small, like what Ruin is a security breach. So it's at least a little understandable why its efforts fell short. Ivan tried to make a full new game based off a small idea. He started his work on Chapter 2 with the pretense that it would be an update to Jolly 3 to expand its story. Hence why it was called Update 2 at the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 attempts to pick up the torch that Chapter 1 left for it, but instead of feeling like something new, it's exactly like Chapter 1, in the aspects that don't matter. That's not to say that Chapter 2 is a bad game. A sincere attempt was made, and that's all I'm really looking for with this series. However, I'd be lying if I said I was itching to play this one. Chapter 2 is monotonous, boring, and generally unsatisfying. It checks all the boxes for the shit you don't want in your game. The only thing off the top of my head that I can give it credit for is its story. Speaking of, where we left off in Chapter 1, Chapter 2 picks up immediately and throws you back in. However, that's not to say it's all straightforward. Chapter 1 finished off with Theo pushing Jack towards an elevator that leads into the underground facility. We start Chapter 2 in that exact elevator going down to the new facility. My only issue with this setup is it doesn't feel fully connected to Chapter 1. I know that sounds strange, but hear me out. Some time has clearly passed since Chapter 1 ended. Jack's boss is clearly pissed off with him and Theo, and since we're about to start off the first night at 12 AM, it doesn't make a lot of sense playing these two games back to back. From the lore document, it's implied that Chapter 2 starts a day after Chapter 1's Night 5, so that means Jack was led to the elevator, took one look at it and said, "Nah, I'll be back tomorrow," and then just walked off. What was the point of that? Why can't we continue off Night 5? It's not like people are going to be showing up for work soon. The building's been closed for 16 years. It's just a game. Breathe. The elevator reaches the bottom of the building, and with a click of a button, we finally arrived at the underground facility. Some very riveting dialogue later, and Theo has found what is possibly a decommissioned animatronic. We're also introduced to a night vision mode using our phone's camera. I think it's really cool how the focus is occasionally distorted when moving around. You know what, the whole mechanic is cool. I really hope it's used more than once. Theo marks the signal on our map, and we're off. I think now is as good of a time as any to fully discuss this game's free roam. Given the limitations of Click Team, it's near impossible to create a full 3D environment. A couple of games have attempted to use Click Team's own 3D, namely Juniors, but if I'm being honest, it looks like complete shit. I think the way Jolly handles it is infinitely better. The way the player is always blind and can only see when they're still sells the illusion. I don't know if anyone finds that at all interesting, but it's cool to think about. After wading through the darkness, we find the room that the signal is coming from, and wouldn't you know it, it's locked. This is where the main gameplay of Chapter 2 starts. The locked door tells us that we need a keycard to enter, and it's only given to interns that pass the 5-day training test. As we enter the office, the power turns on, just in time to hear Kevin Johnson, the CEO of Jolly Entertainment, be this game's exposition. Kevin tells us that the higher-ups have placed 2 deadly robots to watch over, to stimulate a real threat that we could encounter on the job. Those 2 deadly robots are never actually explained, nor do we ever see them. But don't fret, 2 new deadly robots are here instead. According to the lore document, Jolly and George followed us to the underground. I don't exactly know how, but I like to imagine they both took the elevator. Regardless, Jolly's mask falls off somewhere in this, and he's now walking around without it. Oh yeah, I should also mention that there's for sure a dead guy wearing the Jolly suit. This is Eric Smith, the Jolly 2 protagonist. See, I told you he'd be back. Quick rundown. Eric Smith was an employee for Fazbear Entertainment during the 1980s. Eric made both the Jolly and George animatronics in his spare time using company property and funding. Eric was then fired, and the Jolly and George animatronics were then gifted to Jolly Entertainment after they claimed the rights to the characters. Surprise! Jolly and George are both smash hits with the kids and Jolly Entertainment's bank accounts. Eric was rehired by Fazbear Entertainment after showcasing Antoinette, a cool robot made while unemployed, and it's also that thing we're killed by in Chapter 1. Also around this time, William Afton goes on a killing spree, one of the victims being Zoe Smith, Eric's daughter. This is a turning point in Eric's life as everything goes to shit for him. Not only does he lose his daughter, but he also then loses his wife shortly after when she files for divorce. And then finally his job. Things are not going so hot for old Eric. He then applies to work on a cargo ship for AJMF, the manufacturing company from earlier, under a pseudonym. Eric does this to find the soul of his daughter, which he believes is somewhere on the cargo ship. Afton, fully knowing he's just rehired Eric, devises a plan to get rid of him once and for all, by activating all the animatronics to hunt him down. In between nights, Eric stops to visit his ex-wife. Things escalate, and she secretly follows him onto the cargo ship, where she finds all of his old belongings from when he worked for Fazbear. She attempts to destroy it all, including the Antoinette, but what she doesn't realize is the mess of cables and exposed wires she's created, and accidentally electrocutes herself, killing her near instantly. Eric, rushing to save his belongings, watches as his ex-wife is killed and ultimately using the Antoinette as a vessel. Eric, panicking considering he just inadvertently killed his wife, hides in one of the spare Jolly suits as the other employees find the body. Eric is killed when the spring locks fail. After the incident, Fazbear and Jolly Entertainment split up, and all the cargo was dumped in the old warehouse. You know, for a series titled Jolly, there sure is a lot of death. Okay, so not so much of a quick rundown, but it helps to know who this guy is and why he's a threat. Wait, why is he a threat? Eric and Jack would have never met considering Eric was killed 32 years prior, and odds are Jack would have been very young. Whatever, we need a marketable character for this game, so he'll do. Oh, and there's George. He's George. I never really understood why George, of all characters, was in this game, and not just Jolly, since he already has such strong parallels to Springtrap. Not the biggest issue ever, but it's really off-putting since he doesn't contribute much to the story. The main gameplay structure of Chapter 2 is really simple all things considered. Jolly will start from the bottom of the map and work his way around to the top and to the door to your office. It's important that you look for him in the oddly segmented cameras to know when he's at the door. Once he's there, you must spin around and use the jammer, which should send any threat back to where they came from. I'm not going to even attempt to question how a jammer will stop a corpse in his suit, but whatever works, I guess. George is fundamentally similar, but he has some minor differences. He'll start at the bottom of the map and work his way to a boiler room where he'll mess with the building's temperature. Repair the temperature before the building gets too hot, and you've got yourself an otherwise worthless character. After the heat begins to rise, George will make a beeline for the office. You see what I did there? Beeline. Okay. Only when you see his eyes in the right doorway do you need to use the jammer. Like I said, the gameplay is very straightforward. There are 2 other characters in the form of Shadow, Tweety, and Maxie, who more so act like a phantom than an actual character. Tweety will start to materialize in the office if you stare at an animatronic for too long, and Maxie will mess with the ventilation if you look at him in the cameras. Both characters aren't that much of a threat, but they can be a bit annoying if you get sidetracked. If there's one thing I can say with confidence that I like about the gameplay loop this time, is that this is way easier to understand and replicate as opposed to Chapter 1, or any of the previous Jolly games. All things considered, Chapter 2 is on the easier side. Don't get me wrong, this game can be difficult at times, especially on the first few nights when everything is thrown at you. But I'd be lying if I said this game took any actual brain power. Again, not really an issue, but a hard mode or some difficulty challenges would be pretty cool. After completing the main night's gameplay, we move on to arguably one of the worst parts of this entire game. If you remember at the very start of Chapter 2, Jack's boss tells him that he needs to gather data from the servers for the facility, meaning that the main gameplay each night isn't even what we're supposed to be doing, it's just a distraction to eventually get the keycard. Anyway, this section is what we're supposed to be doing, and it isn't great. We're in Jack's home, I think, as we gather data from the servers. This data is usually an audio log or two from employees. It's not much and usually feels straight out of a cheesy analog horror tape. Regardless of its quality, this is what we do every night. The gameplay in this section, while simple, is incredibly tedious and not very fun. The goal is to decrypt 10 sets of data by clicking and waiting. During this process, you may hear a sound effect like a door creak. This is the cue to turn around and face the 3 entrances to the room. There's the hallway, the bathroom, and the window. The way to tell which entrance the sound came from is to notice if any door is opened. If a door is opened, you need to run to the door and shut it. An animatronic will only be on the other side of the door if you can hear breathing. So if this is the case, giving the threat a good dose of flashlight will repel them. And what better threat to assume this role than the core 4 from FNAF 1? Remember them? They're back, in metal form. The gameplay loop that I've just spent the past few minutes describing is the majority of Chapter 2, that is, until Night 5. Just like Chapter 1, the night carries out the same way until after 6 AM. Jack has finally completed his 5-day test and is now granted access to any of the locked rooms thanks to the keycard. Before we can enter the once locked door, we have to fix the oxygen, which just so happens to have gone offline. We're led back into the free roam section again. The only difference is that Jolly and George are still active. We finally get to use the full capabilities of Jack's limited moveset by walking around, using night vision, and even holding breath when an animatronic is nearby. As much as I love this section, I don't think it was played very much before launch. Because of the newly added threats, the free roam feels clunky, especially since Jolly and George are both incredibly aggressive. Even though this section only took me 2 tries, it still sucked at getting a feel for everything. I think it would have been really cool if in between nights we have to manage to get from the office back to the elevator, using the same free roam features, so we can slowly adapt to how they work. Instead, we're thrown back into it on a much harder difficulty. After that, Jack reaches the oxygen room. Wait a minute. This looks a lot like Jolly 1. Anyway, the goal of this section is to fully restore the oxygen to different parts of the facility before the power runs out. In a very similar manner to Sister Location's Funtime Freddy section, we must balance charging the oxygen and checking on the window. Just like Jolly 1, if there's anything there, we need to close the door. Very simple. I adore all the small callbacks, or technically call forwards, to the original game. It feels really sweet, especially if you didn't know this is coming. After getting the oxygen restored, we can finally make our way back. And with that, you've seen all Jolly 3 has to offer. While I am glad that I finally got around to covering this game, since it's always been one of my favorites, I'm mostly disappointed the game didn't hold up to the quality standard I'd set so long ago. Like I've said multiple times already, that doesn't mean Jolly 3 is a bad game, it's a sincere project that I even cared about, and that's all that really matters. However, that doesn't mean that I can't be critical of it. I've been making these shitty little fan game reviews since I was 13, and since then, I've seen people who I thought couldn't improve make some of my personal favorites. All this banter to say that I'm super excited for Jolly 4, if it ever releases. I'm not good with closing thoughts considering that I've already laid out my problems and general opinion on these 2 games, so do with that as you will. Anyway, I've been Sir50 Fangame Review, thanks for sticking around.